Aethera is a science fantasy setting and rule set for the Pathfinder role-playing game. It is set just after the end of a century-long interplanetary war between the Hierarchy, an alliance of humans and post-humans from the desert planet of Akasat, and the Arathi plant people of the heavily forested Kir Shirat. The setting is built around the political tensions of post-war reconstruction, integration of the many fractious cultures that were involved in the conflict, and the unique telekinesis and mutation-based technologies used to fight the war. The base Pathfinder rules present an intentionally generic set of fantasy races and classes for players to choose from, like Dwarf and Halfling, Rogue and Alchemist. Players choose a race, class, moral alignment, and a name for their character, and then act as that character within the setting. The Pathfinder Alchemist class is themed around brewing potions, poisons, mutagens, and explosives in a gentleman adventurer meets mad scientist, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde style. Mechanically, they're a hybrid range damage plus self buff class via their bomb throwing and the self-only free potions that act as their spell casting. As they level up, players customize their characters through selection of skills, feats, and class archetypes that swap out one or more class abilities for different abilities to narrow down to a specific niche within the broader fantasy of a class, like a generalist fighter becoming a gladiator. Aethera introduces many new races/species and makes use of the archetype system to allow the creation of characters that are much more thematically tied to the unique politics and technological setting of Aethera. I designed the firearms, medicine, mutation, and cybernetic systems for the game, as well as the Alchemist archetypes that I am discussing today. I designed the Bioengineer Alchemist Archetype to focus on how the Alchemist class's mutation theme intersects with Aetherite, the magical substance that powers most of the Hierarchy's technology, to create a super soldier program. The success of that program created the Paragon super soldiers, and I wanted to give the player something that will fill the fantasy of them playing this mad scientist cackling while dramatic lightning crashes all around him, the guy who creates the Paragons. Having the player pumping out minions that are equivalent of endgame bosses would have trivialized most of the gameplay, as well as the contribution of the other members of their party, so I focused the archetype on using the failures of that program as throwaway biological weapons. Bioengineers lose access to the bomb feature of the base class in exchange for reckless experimentation, which summons a temporary ally afflicted with the Aether-warped creature template. I built this template as part of our enemy system to represent creatures that had spent too much time in contact with unprocessed aetherite. It grants powerful, uncontrolled telekinetic powers, but greatly shortens the creature's lifespan and makes them very suggestible, perfect for making powerful puppets to do the bioengineer's bidding. Bomb is the primary damage ability of the Alchemist, so I had to be sure that in converting them from a direct attacker to a summoning class, that I balanced their damage output with the crowd control and flexibility that the list of summonable creatures would provide. I did want to tie back to the explosive specialization of the standard Alchemist, and I wanted something flashy to make the Bioengineer really stand out. The fun really kicks in when they gain the Volatile Essence ability, which causes any of their summoned minions that die to explode as the unstable energies used to create them are released. When I modeled the expected performance for the archetype, I found that the damage from the standard Alchemist Bomb starts out stronger, but as the duration and power of the Aether Warp summon scales up, their damage output catches up with the Bomber-style Alchemist in the higher levels. I also found that the summoning style scaled considerably with the duration of the fight, with the Bomber having a significant advantage in shorter encounters and the Bioengineer being favored in combats that run long. The battlefield control aspect of the summon monsters ended up being fairly comparable to a bomb-throwing alchemist that spec their bombs into crowd-controlling effects. I had originally designed additional abilities that the Bioengineer would scale into that would allow them to intentionally detonate their Aether Warp summons, and to allow them to apply mutations based on summoner adaptations. The adaptation ability was a great thematic match, but the complexity of managing several templated summon creatures on top of the huge number of summon adaptations available proved to be overly complicated, so we cut it. Abilities like this are easier to manage for the player in a video game, where the player can be presented with the list of available summoning options with the template pre-applied, moving the record-keeping load from the player to the computer. Overall, I love the Biomancer, and I'm very happy with how well it captures the wild, desperate research into Aetheric mutation, but there was one issue that didn't occur to me until after publication. While the Hierarchy Bioengineers are well represented, the Arathi also had alchemists working primarily in mutating plants into monsters to fight off the human invaders, and the Aether Warp template does not represent that. It could have been addressed by introducing another template that was themed around these plant monsters and allowing the player to choose which of those templates was applied by the reckless experimentation ability when they gained it. While most citizens of the hierarchy on Akasat live in giant ruins left over from an ancient civilization, the majority of the planet is a massive desertified ocean bed, rife with scavengers, hostile wildlife, and cannibal raiders. Part of the firearms system that I designed was to create scrap guns to represent the cobbled together nature of all of the equipment out in the wasteland, and the Wastelander Alchemist is the guy that does the cobbling. The wastes of Akasat are a place to tell a different story than the big space battles and political machinations that the rest of the setting excels at. Here I wanted to focus on the feelings of resource scarcity and tenaciously clinging to life. Running out of food, water, or ammunition in the wastes is a big hazard. The Wastelander addresses this by leaning into the explosives chemist theme of the base class to create scrap bullets every day for free. This ability is very in theme, but the scrap bullets are not particularly good as they're made from scavenged parts and represent that mechanically by misfiring abnormally often. And the 1/2 your survival check per day doesn't make very many of them. It's way better than running out of bullets entirely, but given that I traded an entire Discovery, one of the Alchemist's main power selections, for this ability, it isn't impressive enough for what we're paying. This would be much better if it created significantly more bullets in exchange for a less significant ability from the Alchemist's kit. Although it is thematically appropriate for the abilities Wasteland Wanderer and Wasteland Survivor to grant a favored terrain bonus and permanent resistance to extreme weather, respectively, these are very minor bonuses. I really needed to give the archetype something with a little more sizzle. As it is, it's functional but uninspiring. Aethera came out a few years before it was introduced, but the Wastelander feels like it would be more at home as a variant of the 5th edition D&D Artificer class, given how much it pushes the theme away from lotions and potions and more toward a gadgets and gizmos style. Aetherite is the source for the telekinesis effects that Aethera uses for its guns and spaceships, so I wanted to ensure that any alchemist could interact with what is basically the most important material in the setting. Discoveries are a modular ability that any alchemist can pick up as part of their kit, and I created 2 Aetherite-centric discoveries to allow players who are not playing one of the archetypes unique to the setting to feel more involved with that material. Aetheric Plasma Bomb is the first, and I wanted it to channel the 3 major effects that Aetherite has in the setting. It stores energy, it releases that energy as both electricity and telekinetic force, and it emits dangerous, mind-erasing radiation. The electricity blast and the aetherite poisoning effects very directly reference those themes, and then affecting incorporeal creatures as though it were a force effect is how we tie back to the telekinesis aspect. And it's a surprisingly significant advantage because it gives the player a tool for handling notoriously difficult to damage enemies like ghosts. The second, Netherite Bomb, has Aetheric Plasma Bomb as a prerequisite and comes in at level 16, quite late in the game, and so it needed a very flashy effect. Netherite is basically anti-Aetherite. Weaponizing it shuts down Aethertech devices, the setting's Magitech gizmos, and deals bonus damage to Aetherite-infused creatures, which includes some of the setting's most powerful enemies. Turning off technological items is not something an alchemist will normally have access to, and can be very potent in the late game when many enemies will be loaded down with cyborg limbs and ray guns. This also gives us a bit more separation between the purely magical and technological items in the setting, which was a nice side benefit. The challenge of designing and implementing mechanics for a narrative setting is in ensuring that everything you build ties back and supports the themes of the work. That can be the fantasy of a particular sort of hero, the socio-political environment, or an emotional tone like loneliness or anxiety over scarce resources. Players are very sensitive to mechanics that break too far from the intended theme, and it is always my great joy to find the path of greatest ludonarrative harmony.